Have you ever stopped to think about what's really watching you when you're alone in the forest? What happens when a camper disappears for 3 days and returns a changed person? Why are there places in Alaska where even animals refuse to go? What if I told you that some 911 calls should never have been answered? My name is Thomas Henriksen. I've been a police officer for 34 years with the Fairbanks Police Department in Alaska. I've seen a lot in these forests. Things that training manuals don't prepare you for. Things that make you question what we really know about this world. These 3 stories are true. They happened to me, and they completely changed the way I see these forests. Story 1. The Man Who Came Back the Wrong Way. Fairbanks, Alaska, October 2011. It was 2:47 a.m. when the patrol radio crackled with that 911 call. The call was from the Chena River State Recreation Area. A camper had returned to the parking lot after being missing in the woods for 3 days. According to his wife, who made the call, he had been acting strangely. At that time, I had been a police officer for 23 years. I thought I'd seen it all. Lost campers were nothing new in Alaska. The forests here are different from forests elsewhere. They are vast, silent, and have a peculiar way of making even experienced people completely lose their sense of direction. I drove for 45 minutes to the recreation area, accompanied by my younger partner, O'Brien. It was a moonless night. The darkness in Alaska in October is different. It's a darkness that feels solid, that feels weighty. When we arrived at the parking lot, there was only one vehicle, a green Subaru Outback with Oregon license plates. Our car's headlights illuminated a woman standing next to the car. She was about 35 years old, with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. She was shivering, but not just from the cold. She approached as soon as we got out of the car. Her eyes were wide. The first thing she said was that her husband, David, was inside the car, that he had simply shown up in the parking lot 20 minutes ago, that she was about to call for rescue in the morning after spending 3 days waiting. I walked over to the Subaru and pointed my flashlight inside. A man was sitting in the passenger seat, completely still, staring straight ahead. He was wearing the same camping clothes he probably had on when he entered the forest. But there was something profoundly wrong about the scene. His clothes were immaculate, no tears, no dirt, no sign that he had spent 3 days lost in the forest. His boots were clean, his face was clean. I knocked on the window. He didn't react. I opened the door slowly. The smell that came from the car was the first thing that made me feel that knot in my stomach. It wasn't the smell of sweat or dirt. It was the smell of damp earth, of moss, of something that had spent time underground. "David, my name is Thomas. I'm a police officer. Can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me, slowly, as if he were relearning how to make that movement. His eyes were completely black, not black like dilated pupils, black as if there were no irises left, as if they had been filled with black ink. He opened his mouth. For a long second, no sound came out. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from very far away, he said a single sentence. "They were waiting for me." I called O'Brien and we requested an ambulance. His wife was panicked. She said David had never had any mental health problems, that he was an experienced camper, that she couldn't understand what had happened. While we waited for the ambulance, I tried to get David out of the car. He got out, but his movements were strange, as if he were using a body that wasn't his, as if he were wearing a suit that didn't fit properly. He stood beside the car, gazing towards the forest. His dark eyes were fixed on the darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights. My wife pulled me aside. Her hands were icy cold when she held my arm. She told me that when David showed up, he was barefoot, that his boots were tied to his hands, that he was carrying the boots as if he didn't know what they were for. When she asked where he had been, he said he was in a place where the trees have no shade. The ambulance arrived 30 minutes later. The paramedics tried to examine David, but he didn't respond to their questions. He just kept staring at the forest. He only repeated the same phrase from time to time. They were waiting for me. I should have let the ambulance take him away. I should have filed my report and left. But something about that situation was completely wrong. Something beyond just a person lost in the woods. I asked his wife to show me exactly where David had entered the forest 3 days earlier. She pointed to a marked trail, the Granite Tors Trail, a popular, well-marked trail. I decided to do a quick scan of the area with my flashlight. That's when I noticed something strange. Footprints leading out of the forest. Barefoot footprints leading straight to the parking lot. David's footprints. But there was something disturbing about those footprints. They started out of nowhere, as if David had simply appeared in the middle of the road. As if he hadn't walked from that point, as if he had materialized there. I followed the footprints back for about 50 meters, and then they simply stopped, in the middle of the trail, with no other marks around. Just those barefoot footprints appearing out of nowhere. O'Brien was with me. He saw the same thing I did. He shone a light around the area, searching for some explanation. There wasn't one. We returned to the parking lot. The ambulance was already leaving with David. His wife would follow us to the hospital. Before she left, I asked if David had said anything else. She hesitated. Then she told me yes. When she asked what he meant by, "They were waiting," David replied with something she couldn't quite understand. He said there were other people down there. People who had been forgotten. People who had stayed too long. I should have ended my shift there, but I couldn't. There was something in that forest, something that took David and returned him. Different. O'Brien and I decided to do a preliminary search of the area where the footprints began, just to verify. We entered the trail with our high-powered flashlights. The forest was in absolute silence. Not even insects, not even wind in the trees. Just that heavy silence that seems to absorb any sound you make. We walked for 15 minutes until we reached the spot where the footprints appeared. O'Brien did a thorough scan of the area with his flashlight. That's when we saw it. About 30 meters from the trail, there was a small clearing. And in the center of the clearing, there was something that shouldn't be there. Holes. There are no natural holes. Perfectly circular holes dug in the ground. About 12 or 15 holes, each about 1.5 meters in diameter, deep enough that our flashlights couldn't reach the bottom, and around each hole there were clothes, old backpacks, camping equipment covered in moss and dirt. O'Brien pulled out his radio to call for backup, but before he could speak, we heard him. A sound coming from inside one of the holes. It wasn't an animal sound, it wasn't wind, it was a voice. A human voice, calling for help, at the voice of David. But David was in the ambulance. David was on his way to the hospital at that moment. O'Brien shone a light on the hole where the sound was coming from. For a second, we saw something moving down there. Something pale, something that had the shape of a person. And then the voice changed. It started mimicking my voice, calling O'Brien's name, asking for help, saying he'd fallen into the hole and needed to be pulled up. We left that clearing, running, without looking back. The sound followed us along the trail. Voices of different people, all calling for help, all imitating familiar voices. When we arrived at the parking lot, we immediately called for reinforcements. A search team arrived at dawn. They found the clearing. They found the holes. But the holes were empty. No sound, no voice, just damp, dark earth. The team descended into 3 of the holes. They were about 4 meters deep. At the bottom, they found only compacted earth and scratches. Scratches on the earthen walls, as if someone had tried to climb out. The clothes and backpacks found around the holes were analyzed. Some were decades old. They belonged to people who had disappeared in that area over the years. David was hospitalized for 2 weeks. His eyes returned to normal after 5 days. He remembered nothing of the 3 days he was missing. The last thing he remembered was leaving the trail to take a picture of the sunset. After that, he only remembered being back in the parking lot. The doctors found nothing wrong with him, no injuries, no dehydration, as if he hadn't spent 3 days in the forest. But there was one thing the doctors noticed, and it makes me think about that night to this day. When they x-rayed David's chest, they found dirt, compacted dirt inside his lungs, as if he had been buried, as if he had breathed underground. That clearing with the holes was monitored for months. Cameras were installed, but they never captured anything unusual. To this day, that area remains open to the public. The trail continues to be used by campers, but I never went back there again. And sometimes late at night, I think about those voices coming from the holes, voices of people who might still be there, waiting for someone who will stay alone in the forest long enough. Story 2, The Camp That Shouldn't Exist. Denali National Park, July 2016. 5 years after the incident with David, I thought I had seen the worst that these forests had to offer. I was wrong. The 911 call came in at 11:23 a.m. A hiker had found an abandoned campsite in the wilderness of Denali National Park. According to her, there was something deeply disturbing about the campsite. She couldn't explain it properly to the dispatcher. She just kept repeating that we needed to see it in person. I was about to retire, 28 years of service. A few more weeks, and I would be free of these forests, free of these strange calls. The hiker met us at the nearest access point. Her name was Sarah. She was about 40 years old, an experienced guide, the kind of person who knows these forests better than anyone. But when we found her, she was visibly shaken. Her hands trembled as she held the map, showing where the camp was located. The first thing she said was that the camp shouldn't be there, that she knew the area, that she had guided groups along that trail dozens of times, and that she had never seen that camp before. My new partner, Sergeant Chen, and I followed Sarah along the trail. It was a 2-hour hike to the location. Sarah remained silent the entire way, but I could see in her eyes that she was reliving what she had seen. What struck me first was the silence. As we approached the area Sarah had marked on the map, the forest became progressively quieter. No birds, no animal sounds, just the sound of our boots on the ground. And then we saw the camp was in a small clearing. 5 tents arranged in a perfect circle, a campfire in the center, backpacks and equipment neatly organized around each tent. At first glance, it looked like a normal campsite, until you noticed the details. The tents were covered in moss, as if it had been there for years, but the moss grew in a strange way, only in specific patterns, forming symbols, concentric circles, spirals. The backpacks were organized, but all the zippers were open, as if someone had meticulously searched each backpack and then left them exactly where they were. The bonfire was cold, ancient ashes, but as I approached, I noticed that the ashes were arranged in a pattern, a perfect circle with lines radiating from the center. Chen started photographing the scene. While she was doing that, I walked around the camp. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were no footprints. None. Neither entering the camp nor leaving, as if the people who set up that camp had simply vanished. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing. She didn't want to get any closer. When I asked why she had called 911, she pointed inside one of the tents. I slowly opened the first tent. The smell that came out was intense. It didn't smell like decomposition. It smelled like damp earth, like roots, like something growing in the dark. Inside the tent, there was a sleeping bag, completely covered in tiny roots. The roots grew through the fabric, intertwining in intricate patterns. And in the center of the sleeping bag, there was a shape, a human shape, as if someone had been lying there and the roots had grown around their body. But there was no body, only the impression left in the roots. I checked the other 4 tents. They all had the same thing. Sleeping bags covered in roots, human shapes imprinted on them, but no bodies. Chen found something among the belongings: wallets, IDs, 5 different people, 2 men and 3 women, ages between 24 and 45, all from different parts of the United States. When we checked the names in the system, we discovered something impossible. These 5 people had disappeared in Denali National Park, but not recently. They had disappeared in different years. The first in 2003, the last in 2015. They were never found. How did all their belongings end up together in that camp? How were tents belonging to people who disappeared 12 years apart, pitched in the same place? Chen found something else. Diaries. Each stall had a diary. I started reading the first one. The initial entries were normal. A 28-year-old woman hiking solo, describing the beauty of the landscape, talking about camping under the stars. But later entries changed. She began writing about sounds at night, about feeling like she was being watched, about waking up in places different from where she had fallen asleep. The last entry consisted of only 3 words, written multiple times, filling entire pages. They will plant me. They will plant me. They will plant me. The other diaries had similar patterns, normal camping accounts that progressively became more disturbing. They all ended with variations of the same message. They want me to stay here. I can't get out of the clearing. The trees won't let me pass. I will become a part of them. I called for reinforcements and a forensic team. While we waited, I decided to sweep the area around the clearing. That's when I realized the trees around the clearing were different. Their trunks had strange protrusions, shapes that looked almost human, like faces pressed from the inside out of the bark, like hands trying to push their way out. Chen saw them too. She began to count. We found 17 trees with these protrusions, all around the clearing, all with vaguely human shapes. Sarah, who had been keeping her distance, finally spoke. She said that the clearing wasn't on any map, that the area must be dense forest, that there shouldn't be any open space there. The forensic team arrived 3 hours later. They removed all the belongings. They cut samples of the roots that were growing through the sleeping bags. But when they tried to take down the tents, something strange happened. The tent stakes wouldn't budge from the ground. No matter how hard they pulled, it was as if they were welded to the earth. Eventually, they had to cut the ropes and leave the stakes where they were. As the sun began to set, the team decided to finish removing the evidence the following morning. No one wanted to stay there overnight. But before we left, one of the forensic technicians called me over. He had found something buried near one of the trees. Just a few centimeters from the surface were bones, human bones. But they weren't normal bones. They were green, covered in a layer of something that looked like lichen, and there were roots growing through them, tiny roots that went into the pores of the bones and came out the other side. The bones were arranged in a pattern, not buried randomly, arranged with purpose, forming symbols I couldn't understand. We left that clearing before nightfall. During the entire walk back, none of us spoke. We just walked in silence, listening to our own footsteps echoing in the empty forest. The team returned the following morning to finish the job, but when they got there, the clearing had changed. The tents were in different positions. Now they formed a straight line, all pointing in the same direction, towards a specific part of the forest. And there was something new in the center of the clearing. Where the campfire once stood, there was now a hole, perfectly circular, about 1 meter in diameter, deep enough that lanterns couldn't reach the bottom. The team didn't go down into that hole. They had orders to document and then leave. They took photos, they took measurements, and they left. 3 days later, a forensic technician who had worked at the site called me. He said that the root samples he had collected were still growing in the lab, in sealed tubes. They were still growing. And when he looked at the roots under the microscope, he saw something that shouldn't be there. Cells. Cells that weren't from plants. Human cells intertwined with plant cells, as if they were fusing together. That area was officially closed to the public. The official reason given was geological instability. But I know the real reason. I know because 2 weeks later, we received another call. Another camper was missing in that area. When the search team arrived at the clearing, there were 6 tents now, 6 tents in a perfect circle, a new one. And inside the new tent, there were roots, fresh roots, not yet covered in moss, growing through a sleeping bag, forming the impression of a body that had recently lain there. The missing camper was never found. But when they checked the trees around the clearing, there were 18 now. 18 trees with protrusions that looked like human shapes. I retired 2 months later, but I still think about that clearing. I still think about the words in the diary. They're going to plant me, and I wonder how many of the trees in Alaska used to be people. People who were left alone in the forest for too long. People who were found by whatever lives in those clearings. People who are now growing towards the sun, unable to scream. Story 3. The radio broadcast that never stopped. White Mountains National Recreation Area. March 2019. I'd been retired for 3 years when I received the call. It wasn't an official call. It was my old captain, Hendricks. He said he needed me. He said there was something only I would understand. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want anything more to do with those forests. But Hendricks was a good man. And when he said that 6 people were missing and that the situation was getting increasingly strange, I agreed to help. The situation was this. A group of hikers had entered the White Mountains for a 10-day expedition. An experienced group, 3 couples, all with winter survival experience, top-of-the-line equipment, radio communication system. They maintained regular contact with the forest ranger station for 5 days, reporting their positions and describing the weather conditions. Everything seemed normal. On the 6th day, the radio broadcast changed. The forest ranger receiving the transmissions said that one of the hikers' voices sounded different, monotonous, as if you were reading from a script, reporting positions that didn't make sense, describing weather that didn't match the actual conditions in the area. On the 7th day, all 6 voices appeared on the radio transmission, all speaking at the same time, all repeating the same coordinates that, when checked on the map, led to an area without trails, an area that, according to all records, was dense forest. And then, on the 8th day, the transmissions stopped, except they didn't really stop. The forest ranger continued to receive transmissions, but they were no longer human voices. They were sounds, sounds of people breathing, sounds of footsteps in the snow, sounds of something being dragged. And then silence, followed by a single phrase, repeated by all 6 voices in unison. "We are home now." The broadcast continued. Every hour, the same phrase, repeated endlessly, for 3 days. That's when they put together the search team, and that's when Hendricks called me. I met the team at the forest ranger station. There were 12 people, experienced guides, 2 search dogs, thermal tracking equipment, 3 days worth of supplies, and me, a 62-year-old retired police officer who shouldn't be doing this anymore. Hendricks showed me the coordinates the hikers had transmitted. He overlaid the transmissions on a map of the region. The points formed a pattern, a circle that progressively closed in, as if the hikers were walking in ever smaller spirals, all converging on a central point. The central point was marked on the map as unnamed area. No name, no classification, just a blank space. We set off at dawn. The snow was deep, almost a meter in some places. The dogs were restless. They kept looking back as if they wanted to return. It took us 2 days to get close to the coordinates. Throughout the journey, the team maintained radio contact with the base, reporting positions and describing conditions. On the night of the 2nd day, something strange happened. We set up camp in a protected area, tents in a semicircle. Campfire in the center, night guards on 2-hour shifts. I was on the second shift. It was 2 a.m. The forest was in absolute silence. No wind, no animals, just that heavy silence that I knew so well. And then I heard the radio. Not our radio, a different radio, coming from deep within the forest. A weak transmission, static and distant voices. I woke Hendricks. We both heard it. The transmission was clear enough for us to understand the words. It was one of the voices of the missing hikers, transmitting coordinates. The same coordinates, repeating them endlessly. But there was something else. In the background of the transmission, behind the static, there were other sounds. Sounds of people murmuring, as if dozens of voices were speaking at the same time, all saying different things, but none making sense. The broadcast lasted 15 minutes, and then it stopped abruptly. We decided to continue at dawn. The dogs now refused to move forward. They had to be pulled by their leashes. One of the guides suggested turning back. You said something was wrong, that the animals knew, but we couldn't go back. 6 people were missing. We needed to find them. We arrived at the exact coordinates at noon on the 3rd day, and there was nothing there. No clearings, no campsites, just forest, dense trees, untouched snow. The team spread out, searching for signs, for footprints, for any evidence that the hikers had been there. That's when one of the guides shouted he had found something. A tree, a single tree in the center of the area. A tree that didn't resemble any other around it. Its trunk was almost 2 meters in diameter, ancient, very ancient. But there was something deeply disturbing about it. The tree bark had markings, not natural markings, marks that looked like letters, symbols, carvings that formed words in languages I couldn't understand. And near the base of the tree, half buried in the snow, were objects, backpacks. The backpacks of 2 missing hikers. Hendricks ordered the team to start digging. They removed the snow around the base of the tree, and that's when we met roots. Massive roots sprouting from the base of the tree. But these roots didn't spread out normally. They formed patterns, concentric circles, spirals, the same patterns I had seen in that clearing years ago, and intertwined in the roots were clothes, pieces of camping equipment, and bones, lots of bones. But it wasn't just the bones of the 6 hikers. There was more, much more, as if that tree were growing over a cemetery. One of the technicians started taking pictures, but when he looked at the photos on the camera, he turned pale. He showed me the screen. In the photo of the tree, there was something that wasn't visible to the naked eye. Shapes, human shapes, pressed against the inner bark, dozens of them. As if there were people inside the tree, people trying to get out. And in the photos, you could see faces, faces distorted in silent screams, hands pressed against the bark. Hendricks decided we needed to cut down the tree, check the inside. That's when everything fell apart. The moment the chainsaw touched the tree bark, all the team's radios started transmitting all at once. All 6 voices of the hikers screaming, begging not to be cut, begging to be left alone. And then other voices, dozens of them, hundreds, all overlapping, all screaming. A chorus of agony coming from inside the tree. The person with the saw dropped the tool. His hands were trembling. He said that when the blade touched the bark, he felt it. He felt vibrations, like heartbeats, as if the tree were alive in a way that trees shouldn't be. Hendricks ordered an immediate retreat. We weren't going to cut down that tree. We weren't going to disturb whatever that was. While the team gathered the equipment, I stood watching the tree. And I swear I saw it. I saw the bumps on the bark move, subtly, like breathing, as if the tree were breathing. We started to drift apart. The radios were still transmitting, but now it was just static with whispers buried within it, whispers that sounded like names, my name, Hendricks' name, the names of everyone on the team. We walked for an hour, putting distance between ourselves and that tree. That's when we realized the dogs had vanished. Both search dogs, they simply disappeared. No one had noticed when no one had heard anything. We called for them. We searched, but they were no longer with the team. And then we heard the barking, coming from the direction of the tree. Desperate barking, panicked barking. No one suggested going back to get the dogs. We all knew it would be pointless. We kept walking, and the barking continued for hours, always at the same distance behind us. As if the dogs were following us but couldn't catch up. As if they were trapped somewhere between where we were and where we had been. Eventually, the barking stopped, and the forest was silent again. It took us 2 days to get back to the forest ranger station. When we arrived, we were all exhausted, traumatized. Nobody talked about what we had seen. Hendricks filed the report. 6 people missing, presumed dead. Location inaccessible. Extreme conditions. Recommendation to close the area. But there was a problem. Radio broadcasts did not stop. Every hour, at exactly the same time, the radios at the ranger station received transmissions. The same voices, the same 6 hikers, reporting coordinates, describing conditions. And now there were 2 new voices, barking voices, dog voices, transmitting along with the human voices. The transmissions continued for weeks, then for months. To this day, according to Hendricks, they still continue. Every hour, always the same voices, always the same coordinates. Coordinates that lead to that tree. 3 months later, I received a call from one of the team members. He said he couldn't stop thinking about the tree, that he dreamed about it every night, that in his dreams he walked up to the tree, and the tree opened, and he went inside. He said he was going back, that he needed to come back, that the tree was calling him. I tried to convince him not to go, but he hung up the phone. 2 weeks later, Hendricks called me. He said they had received new transmissions, 9 voices now, the 6 original ones, the 2 dogs, and a new voice, the voice of the team member, transmitting the same coordinates, reporting that he was at home. That area remains officially closed. But I know that won't stop people. There's always someone who doesn't believe the warnings. There's always someone who thinks they're different, and the tree remains there, growing, waiting. I never go back to those forests, not since that day. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up with the feeling that I heard something, a radio transmission, familiar voices, calling me, telling me there's space, that the tree still has room, that I should come back. And the most terrifying part of me wants to go. Part of me wants to know what happens when you go inside, when you become part of that tree, when you join the chorus of voices that never stop broadcasting. But I resist, because I know that if I go, there will be a 10th voice in those broadcasts, and it will be mine, repeating coordinates eternally, calling other people to join me, inviting people to stay alone in the forest. My name is Thomas Henriksen. These 3 stories are true. I have changed some names. I have omitted some details that are still part of open investigations, but the essential remains. There is something in the Alaskan forests, something that waits, something that watches over lonely people. In my 34 years as a police officer, I responded to over 200 calls related to disappearances in forests. We found bodies in about 60% of the cases. The causes varied: hypothermia, animal attacks, accidents. But there are 40% that have never been explained. People who disappeared without a trace. Equipment found in impossible places. Radio transmissions that continue after the person should be dead. And there are patterns. There are always patterns. Circles, spirals, symbols carved into trees, holes dug in specific formations, voices that mimic people you know. If you decide to camp alone in Alaska, remember these rules. Never leave the marked trails after nightfall. If you hear voices calling your name in the forest, don't answer. It's not who you think it is. If you wake up in a different place from where you fell asleep, leave the area immediately. If you find a campsite that shouldn't be there, don't go in. Don't touch anything. Leave and report it to the authorities. If your radio transmission starts echoing your own words back to you, turn off the radio and return to civilization. And above all, if you feel you're being watched, trust that instinct, because you are. And whatever is watching is deciding whether you'll stay long enough. Enough time to become part of the forest.